Greetings, ladies, germs, and fellow music geeks of all persuasions, and greetings especially from Houston, Texas, and Gwangju, South Korea. You
Yes.
are, you are now listening to the 19th installment, 19th of the Curmudgeon Rock Report.
Imagine that. That would be 19 episodes in 8 months, which is by a lot of DIY podcast standards, ain't bad.
Yeah.
Considering that we didn't know what we were doing this time a year ago, I think that we have come a long way. We're certainly better than Product 19, the cereal. I will say that was my least favorite of the brand cereals as a kid.
Yeah, that was definitely the blandest. I much preferred Special K.
Yeah, and what you mean ketamine?
Ketamine. When I got older, I got into that more.
Yeah. I was going to say, hey, I never actually did Special K. It's like one of the only drugs I didn't do in my younger days. But be that as it may, hey, so folks know, we're recording this a couple of days after the 20th anniversary of September 11th. And it's interesting. Two of my favorite albums of all time came out on September 11th, 2001. Jay-Z's The Blueprint, which was the most New York hip-hop record that had come out in at least a decade.
But definitely not the best.
We disagree. And also Dylan's Love and Theft, which I still think is one of the top 5 records of the last 25 years. Just brilliant stuff, which captured George Bush and Al Gore. I hear those two guys all over that record. Maybe that's just me and maybe I'm crazy, but I hear that. But strange, but true. I did some research. Slayer's God Hates Us All was released on September 11, 2001. Thereby making them Osama bin Laden's favorite band. And if you were offended by that, curmudgeonrock@gmail.com or go add us on Twitter at curmudgeonpod.
And let it be known that we don't give a fuck if you're offended by that.
No, we don't. We don't. But we invite some shit talking.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned Jay-Z's A Blueprint. That's an album that I've always seen as one of the demarcation points of the beginning of the end of mainstream hip hop as being quality music. And that brings us to our episode today. I love it. He doesn't. We're each going to talk about albums that we love that the other person doesn't love. They could like it, but just not love it. And then we'll do vice versa. So this will be fodder for lots of curmudgeonly bickering, bitching, and overall disagreement.
We will now enter our parallel universe. The parallel universe is where we go every episode, and this is really a universe that we prefer. We cross over to the other side, and lo and behold, the best artists in rock, hip-hop, dance, or whatever you want to call it are on the top of the charts. They're filling the stadiums. People love them and respect them as much as we do. They're not a well-kept secret. They're plastered on Rolling Stone covers. And it's interesting. Some of our folks in the parallel universe that we've covered have won Grammys. But since nobody gives a shit about the Grammys anymore, I guess that's okay. On that note, this is where each of us visits an album that's come out recently. And let us call this the blues before and after death metal version of the parallel universe. Arturo, you first.
Or as I like to call it, the version of the parallel universe.
Yeah, Starscream on vocals, everyone.
Starscream, yeah. Well, like I said, the album I will not really recommend, but I will talk about because we talked about this band before. Several episodes ago, Death Heaven, the heavy metal band from the Bay Area, made our list of the 20 greatest artists in modern rock. So naturally, with their new album, Infinite Granite, out now, it's natural that we review it as if they were a staple of modern rock radio, or at least, as you said before, Chris, modern rock radio as imagined by us curmudgeons. So, in summary, Death Heaven, originating in San Francisco, is arguably the greatest heavy metal band of the last decade, and arguably the only rock artist to have done something totally unique and original with the genre in more than a decade. Basically, they merged the bombast and the power of death metal with the shimmering prettiness of shoegazer and the shifting dynamics of prog rockish multi-section compositional style of post rock. Now, well, I admit I'm not a big fan of either of those three subgenres, with a few exceptions. Death Heaven did manage to walk a tightrope, and they created something intoxicatingly heavy and beautiful and weirdly melodic and accessible at the same time. I mean, they came as close to crossing over without crossing over as any band had. Their absolute peak and the album that best exemplifies what Death Heaven is all about is Sunbather from 2013, which is pretty much a modern classic at this point.
Yeah, it's a jaw dropper for sure.
Yeah. New Bermuda from 2015 is also excellent, and it accentuates the metal aspect of the band. Ordinary Corrupt Human Love from 2018, their most recent album, has a cleaner sound and production, and it accentuates the post-rock side of the band. Imagine Mogwai if they were consistently good and not as yawn-inducing. And that's pretty much what that album was for Mogwai. For Death Heaven. Now, enter Infinite Granite. Now, Death Heaven, for as groundbreaking as they seemed 8 years ago, over the course of the past few years, they've revealed themselves to be pretty rigid in the triangle that they live in, right? And that triangle is death metal / heavy metal post rock. Death metal, heavy metal / post rock, and shoegazer. Like those are their three corners, right? And whereas the previous two albums leaned a little more on the first two, while managing to strike that lovely balance, right? The new album leans way, way too heavily on the shoegazer side, while making the other two elements of their sound almost obsolete. And the result is this shiny, shimmering piece of glossy indie dream pop that is painfully cliche and conventional, and it really kills that delicate balance. Remember the tightrope I spoke of earlier? It kills that balance that made Death Heaven so special to begin with. I mean, like, seriously, how many bands in the realm of what is now called indie rock have tread this ground that Death Heaven is doing now, have tread this ground before and ended up being completely forgotten due to hundreds of other bands doing the exact same shit?
Yeah, exactly. Like all these guys, they convince themselves that they can. Hey, I mean, the New Orders and a few other bands out there have been able to do it, and so why can't we? I mean, come on, look, even Smashing Pumpkins failed at this shit. So I mean, you mentioned that they were doing the tightrope. I get this picture of my mind of that French dude that did the tightrope act between the two towers, the twin towers.
Yeah,
and him falling and splattering on the street. That's the image that really comes up because a couple of mistakes on this. One, they don't particularly do the synth, sort of orthodox shoegazer thing well.
Yeah.
They didn't have the songs, and then I mean, come on, dude. You're really, really great at the Starscream, like kind of, because the great thing about death metal is the vocals are an instrument, and so you get that kind of scratchy, raspy,
Right.
but it kind of comes in. But then the dude tries to sing, and it's like, dude, you can't sing. Go
Yeah,
back to
yeah,
yeah,
exactly. I mean, George Clark is the name of the singer, and like that patented death metal growl that he has basically disappeared for the most part, except for like the back end of a couple of songs. And he, like you said, he's actually honest to God singing. But therein lies the problem. He's a pretty shitty singer with limited range,
yeah,
and he has the problem is he just has this completely, utterly indistinctive voice. You can go to any dive bar in the Bay Area and find a dude who can sing like George Clark, which is basically not much, and top that off with like some of the wussiest, cheesiest, weak ass melodies befitting a substandard shoegazer record, and you get a shower of shit. And you combine all that together, and you get a once mighty band that has been effectively emasculated in the worst way possible.
yeah. I have to say that you said a substandard shoegazer record, otherwise just known as a shoegazer record.
Yeah, I mean, there's
Yeah,
only one My Bloody Valentine.
yeah, exactly. So now, while we're on the subject of not necessarily death metal, but that sort of that heavy-ish, uh, dark metal thing.
Black
Uh,
metal. It's called black metal.
yes, black metal, and which is weird. I don't. Do you think Def Heaven counts as black metal in the traditional sense, or they're closer to death metal? I mean, there
They're
is a
clo-
difference.
they're closer to death. Well, prime peak Death Heaven is closer to death metal.
Gotcha. Okay, so now I'm going to pivot us into actual black metal. And this is a new album by Wolves in the Throne Room. Some of you may be familiar with them. They probably are America's finest purveyor of black metal, which I hope isn't damning with faint praise. But so I'll talk to them a little bit about them, and they have this thing that they call Cascadian black metal. Yes, they hail from the woods of Washington State. And so just to talk a little bit about them. Now, black metal, much like nu metal, is one of those subgenre names that the artists within it probably wish was never coined. Sure, black metal or doom metal, as it's also called, has its roots in one of the most insane music communities in history, namely a bunch of deeply disturbed guys in Norway who gave themselves names like Euronymous and Death and legit ate each other's bones and murdered each other. Seriously, go check out this YouTube DIY documentary on the band Mayhem. It's one of the, depending on how you want to look at it, funnier or more fucked up watches you'll have all year. Anyway, it's a shame, really, because the black metal connotation and its twisted conventional wisdom cheapens and stains what often can be striking and profound music, stoked by building walls of noise and double take inducing symphonic or over the top synthesizer touches. And it tends to focus much more on the earth than hell. Hey, death is still death, but it's brought to you more by the Vikings and the pagans and less by Satan than the uninitiated would think. Here in
But they
America,
but they still growl their voices. So
yes, yeah, no, they're growling at the dirt rather than the fire,
yeah.
for sure. Here in the U.S. of A., the most revered of the underground black metal bands these days is Wolves in the Throne Room. At least the ones that are actually still doing black metal or death metal or whatever you want to call it. This band really is spearheaded by two brothers, Nathan and Aaron Weaver. They formed this band in Olympia, Washington in 2003, and they soon took to worshiping the trees and the forests and the woods and the beautiful earth of their beloved Cascadian region. If you want to learn more about Cascadia, and its really kind of fascinating worldview, go check out the Wikipedia page for Cascadia. It's entertaining. So, yep, folks, this is music to LARP by. So if you like dressing up in like old witches and wizards clothes, this shit is for you. Aaron Weaver himself describes Wolves in the Throne, their concept, the band's concept of Cascadian black metal this way. Quote, our music invokes the spirits that reside in the mountains and rivers, the sun and moon, the plants and animals. These deities have been with us since ancient times, but their voices have been drowned out in the modern world. Yeah.
Yeah, whatever, dude.
Yeah, exactly. The Weavers extend their reverence for the sweet darkness of the Washington woods into their newest album, the just released and not so subtly titled Primordial Arcana, which, by the way, is my favorite album title this year, slightly ahead of We're All Alone in This Together by Dave. Now, this album builds on the band's tradition of mixing the lush with the somber, with the raging and back again, all while inserting the occasional odd fit of goth and post-punk. It all soars, and it occasionally slows into something beautiful. Now, this will make me sound a little bit lazy, but the highlight, sincerely, of Primordial Arcana comes early in the magnificent first 77 seconds of Mountain Magic. You hear a crackling fire and a low chant juxtaposed against an icy synth riff and sprinkling chimes, which then leads into an ever more dramatic lead guitar line and rapid fire bass drumming that then segues into the booming, soaring riffage and an indecipherable, rasping vocal track that might as well be an instrument. Weaver tells us that Mountain Magic is, quote unquote, an entry point into the world of magic and dreams. Gnarly. Wow. Now, this kind of thing can get to be inert and even boring if it goes on for too long, something that Wolves in the Throne Room have learned as they've aged. Primordial Arcana keeps its thing to 8 songs and 49 minutes, with only 2 songs surpassing 7 minutes. This stands in contrast to the album that first propelled the band and Cascadian metal into broader cult adoration, 2007's Two Hunters. That was 4 songs and 46 minutes.
So basically, they went from like really obscure to just less obscure.
Yeah. Basically, they have their cult following, and that album, coincidentally, was highlighted by a pounding 18-minute coda with the wonderful title "I Will Lay Down My Bones Among the Rocks." I mean, what the fuck is this? That's like something out of Ezekiel, you know? It's kind of creepy. So now the band channeled this newfound economy in Owl Lodge. It's called Owl Lodge. It's a home studio in their beloved Washington woods there outside of Olympia. And these guys self-produced this album. Now, what it cuts in length, it makes up for in height. Even for these guys, this is a loud sonic boom. See especially Masters of Rain and Storm, a rumbling 11-minute pile driver that might work as the score of a new Conan the Barbarian movie.
I was going to mention Conan the Barbarian in my description of this album. This whole album sounds like the soundtrack for the next Conan movie.
Yeah, no shit. And hey, look, everything else is fucking coming back. I mean, I just read that Steven Spielberg is releasing a new version of West Side Story, which is kind of weird.
Oh God!
But hey, if everything else is coming back, why can't Conan? So now here's a last quote from Aaron Weaver. We wanted to emphasize the role of the synthesizers to create an epic and grand atmosphere. The Owl Lodge has a towering monolith of rack synths from the 90s. They contain sounds that cannot be created any other way. Well, you know, actually they can, but you get by now that these guys take black metal to its earthiest, crunchiest extremes. For a decidedly American take on one of Norway's most glorious exports, check out Wolves in the Throne Room. The end.
Okay, now the beginning of my take on this album. Man,
I
listen,
knew you were. I knew you were going to go there.
yeah, like seriously, I know these guys predate Deaf Heaven by almost a decade. Well, not really. Their first album was '07, so they predate Deaf Heaven by only a few years.
Oh,
But
four actually.
yeah,
Yeah.
oh, oh 04 was their first album. Okay, well, if the thing is, like these guys, they don't. Deaf Heaven had this really complicated. Peak Deaf Heaven, I should say, at this point, had their really engaging, complex but appealing set of dynamics that this band Wolves doesn't have. They Deaf Heaven had a melodic invention that is totally absent in Wolves in the Throne Room. And honestly, they just Death Heaven just seems more eclectic in their style. If I'm comparing these two bands that we're comparing here in our parallel
Oh,
universe,
oh, no
you
doubt,
know,
and I'm agreeing with everything you say. I
yeah,
will not make an argument that Wolves in the Throne Room is a better band than Death Heaven. I'm not
yeah.
that dumb.
No,
Uh,
what I'm saying is that whereas Death Heaven transcended their subgenre, to me, Wolves in the Throne Room are just like firmly rooted in it, and to me, aren't doing anything interesting with it. Whereas Death Heaven did, that's
yeah,
that's my point.
well, the thing about it, I actually would say that as black metal goes, these guys are akin to a jam band. Which is interesting because they kind of take it like these twisty, bendy, like weird places, and they do have this sort of loud, soft dynamic that is a little bit more intriguing than other death metal bands. I know that Death Heaven does that.
Fish in the Throne Room.
Yeah, fishing. Yeah, Blues Traveler in the Throne Room.
Well, at least with Fish, the Stonehenge, their old Stonehenge concept album would apply to Wolves in the Throne Room.
Yeah, pretty much. And then, of course, there's also my favorite, Widespread Panic in the Throne Room. Anyway, like I said, I think it's a good record. I do think this band has some chops. They're obviously very earthy, and if they're in the Washington woods, they're probably smoking half of it. You know, you can tell.
Yeah.
But I do think they're worth checking out. I will advise it takes some patience, like all of black metal and all of this sort of symphonic metal. But once you settle in, it's headphone music. It's headphone music, and you have to either be sort of in a meditative state, or you actually have to be doing something, and it will grow on you as you listen. So check it out. So
Yeah, I mean, to me, listen, to me, it's all. It just, I respect the musicianship of these guys. You can tell these guys are really good musicians. But the thing is, it's just that it's just all monotonous and same sounding. It's also, to me, the way I hear it, very subdued compared to
yeah,
a lot of black metal or death metal. I mean, if
yeah,
I'm
absolutely,
if I'm listening to metal, I want it to fucking rock.
yeah,
And
yeah. No,
these guys don't rock enough for my tastes. You
yeah,
know,
they're a little they're pretty and they're precious.
yeah.
Uh, which is, I said, it's an interesting mix because they can riff it up. I mean, there's some sections, Masters of Wind and Storm there, where they get a little bit Metallica ish there
Yeah.
for bits and pieces. So
Right.
no, they can rock, but if there's one criticism, maybe they don't rock enough, but they're good. They're good,
Yeah.
and we're checking out. So
Two more things I want to make about Wolves in the
sure.
Throne Room. You go on YouTube, and I looked at the album stream for this album in particular, Primordial Arcana, and you go through the YouTube comments and go through all of them, right? All male.
Yeah. Absolutely. If you think Rush has a female fan problem, yeah. No, there's not a whole lot of black metal fans, and especially like American, black metal from the woods of Washington. It's kind of funny because they were in Olympia, Washington in 2003.
Which
So
is like the riot girl movement capital of the world,
yeah, it's like all feminists all the time. So I'm sure they got laid, but they didn't pick up any actual fans. Uh, so anyway.
Another thing about last point. Look at the song titles. Let's go through them. Mountain Magic, Spirit of Lightning. I guess they have no radio, so they have to go with the spirit of lightning. Through eternal fields, primal chasm in parentheses, gift of fire, underworld aurora, masters of rain and storm, Eostir, and skyclad passage. These guys have spent way too much time reading George R.R. Martin novels.
No shit. This is why I said it's music to lark by. For sure. If like chasing dragons in a field on a Sunday afternoon is your thing, Wolves in the Throne Room is a band for you. So on that note, let us now exit the parallel universe and go back through the Stargate into ours. So now we can do a literal love-hate relationship between our musical tastes. So Arturo, describe our concept here.
Yeah. Chris, you and I have known each other for almost 30 years. Yes, we're that old. And for all this time, as much as we've agreed on some bands and albums, i.e. anything from the alt grunge era, most classic 60s, 70s rock, our loathing for most corporate radio rock, etc., our curmudgeonly history has also been marked by artists and albums that we've disagreed on. So on this very personal episode of the Curmudgeon Rock Report, we are going crazy 8, as each of us will give 8 albums that we love and explain why, while the other will tear them down and explain why they're overrated. Now, let me make it be clear. If the one person doesn't love this album, it does not mean that we hate it. It means that we probably like it, but we just think it's overrated or not as good as the other person or other critics think they are.
Yeah, so, but there are a couple of instances where there is some hate.
Yes.
But I will say, so we wanted to do this because, again, it highlights. We roomed together in Astoria, New York, a long time ago, 20 years ago. One of the greatest years of my life was where I was unemployed, but had the most success I ever had as a writer and creative. But we spent a lot of time debating what we thought each other was listening to that sucked. I actually, at that point, I was in a big phase of actually admiring Max Martin, which I don't think you ever really dug there, Arturo. I also liked POD. I didn't choose that because I cured myself of that disease after a couple of years.
Yeah.
But this episode, it would have been more interesting if we had just done something on albums that we both hate. Nobody wants to listen to us go on for 5 minutes about $3 bill, y'all.
In rock and roll, as in life, some months are better than others. Actually, some months are way better than others. Travel back 30 years, for instance, when Nevermind, The Low End Theory, Bad Motorfinger, and Blood Sugar Sex Magic were all released on the same day in September 1991. Talk about defining a decade. I'll give you another month that defined a decade. September 1985. How good was it? Well, the Curmudgeon Rock Report will be dedicating an entire episode to that incredible month soon. The PMRC hearings, Farm Aid, We Built This City, Money for Nothing, and Whitney Houston reaching the top 10. Oh, what a month. Is there another month in rock history you feel was just as awesome? Hit us up at curmudgeonrock@gmail.com.
All right. So the first person who will be giving his 8 albums that he absolutely loves, but the other one doesn't, and we'll discuss why. And we're going to go in chronological order in this one instead of like, the rankings of 10 to 1 or anything like that. We're just doing chronological order. And the first of the 8 that I love that Chris doesn't love so much is, oddly enough, from Chris's idol, Neil Young, and his 1972 mainstream breakthrough album, Harvest. Now, I'm just gonna keep this short, sweet, and simple. I love the album because I think it has some of the most beautiful individual songs that Neil Young has ever written, not just his most popular. Yeah, of course, Heart of Gold. Okay, duh. Everyone and their mothers have covered that song. But you have that. You have the beautiful swaying title track. You have Old Man. You have Alabama, The Needle and the Damage Done. Are You Ready for the Country has been covered by, not surprisingly, several country artists.
Country artists, yeah.
Out on the Weekend is a beautiful song. Yeah, there are a couple of schmaltzy symphonic overproductions, one of which sucks. There's a World that's way overdone. But I actually like A Man Needs a Maid. I think that song was really misinterpreted when it came out. A lot of feminists were angry at that song because, what are you saying? A woman's place is only as a maid? No, it's Neil Young saying, I'm fucked up. I need a woman to balance my life.
Yeah. He was a lonely guy.
Yeah.
So, yeah, look, I understand why Harvest gets the love. It's one, and this is going to be a little bit of a theme here. Some of these albums, a lot of albums are defined by their hits. They have those 2 or 3 hits. And then because those hits are so strong and so revered, you kind of let the rest of the album off the hook. That's my attitude about Neil. And as Arturo just said, Neil Young is my idol. He's the guy, I at one point owned 26 of his records. Now I have them on my phone. Via streaming. The guy is brilliant. And that's maybe one of the reasons why I'm lukewarm on Harvest, because this is the album that set the template that Neil came back to a few times for, okay, I've made my weird eccentric statements. Now I need to make some money. And so that's kind of what he did. And look, at this point, during this recording, he had blown out his back, and he was stuck in Nashville, and he happened to have Linda Ronstadt, James Taylor in town, visiting him for the weekend, and they got together and they cut some of these songs. Old Man, Heart of Gold. Everybody knows them. I love Out on the Weekend. Okay, but then beyond that, Arturo mentioned the 2 Jack Nietzsche string section, way over the top, schmaltzy, like boring ass songs. Alabama is Neil ripping off himself. But
it's such a great guitar playing, though. Great riffage, great solos, man.
Well, yeah, but it was done much better in its first iteration, Southern Man, and he didn't have David Crosby and Graham Nash singing background on that. I'm one of the few people that's actually more annoyed than awed by the harmonies of those 3 or 4 guys. So that's something there. The best song on the record is Needle and the Damage Done.
Right.
And so this is supposed to be as kind of not hokey, but this kind of, wide-eyed young guy singing ditties. But in the middle of this, he has this really beautiful solo acoustic guitar performance about heroin addiction and the loss of his friend Danny Whitten. Live, and it's a real departure from the rest of the record, because the rest of the record is sort of like, it's definitely
very polished.
Yeah, very polished, very set for the mainstream. There's always this bullshit that goes on in the rock press and VH1 now about who invented country rock, and people like to ascribe that to the Eagles. Some people have ascribed this to Neil. No, actually, I guess a closer answer would be Sweetheart of the Rodeo by the Byrds is probably a better answer.
Yeah.
So that's always annoyed me too. So when I think of this record, I think of this annoying reverence.
Yeah.
Moving on.
Number 2, my album that I absolutely love that Chris doesn't love as much. And it is the all-time booty shaking, funky as a motherfucker classic by Parliament, George Clinton and Parliament, Mothership Connection from 1975. Now, for all you kiddies out there who don't understand the importance of George Clinton, why Parliament is important particularly as opposed to Funkadelic, which was Clinton's like acid rock, R&B flavored acid rock excursion. Parliament is like the other side of Funkadelic, usually the same musicians, actually, just completely different music. Why Parliament is important? Here's why. Two reasons. Number one, in the second half of the 1970s, from the mid 70s to the end of the 70s, what was dominant? Disco. Okay. Disco had conquered the fucking world at this point. Parliament, by this point, by the mid to late 70s, they were the only artists in Black American music, in R&B, soul, who were keeping funk alive. They were the only ones. All the other funk bands and funk groups went over to disco. Casey and the Sunshine Band started as funk, went into disco. Even freaking James Brown, flirted with disco by 70.
Get off of that thing.
Yeah, I actually kind of like that song. But anyway.
Yeah, no, I like that song, but it's disco. Yeah.
But anyway, so Clinton with the Parliament outfit really kept the funk alive. And he kept it commercial during the peak of disco. So that is why not just Mothership Connection, but a lot of the albums that followed Mothership Connection kept the funk thing going. And the second reason why Parliament is important is that really those Parliament records are foundational influences on the next dominant Black American music form, hip hop. Without Parliament, the basic foundations that the beats that would be sampled later on throughout the 80s. James Brown may be the most sampled man ever. George Clinton, the second most sampled man ever. And a lot of the shit that hip hop did in the 80s wouldn't exist without those fucking badass bass grooves and funky gnarly beats and that Clinton invented.
It's more like the early 90s because the James Brown sampling and sort of the Rick Rubin and the James Brown thing had run its course by 90. And so it was really duking it. It was between jazz and P-Funk. It was Digital Underground first, and then Dr. Dre, obviously, most famously with the Chronic and Doggy Style that brought it out. Here's my thing with Parliament. They are corny as hell.
Oh, they're supposed to be. It's supposed to be over the top. It's post-acid, man. That's the whole point.
Yeah, I understand. But the Brothers from Outer Space bit, Earth, Wind, and Fire did it better.
No, they didn't. They did a watered-down, cheesy, hokey soccer mom version of what Parliament did.
No,
yes, it was, dude. Oh, come on. Listen, Parliament are when aesthetically, they were the natural extension of Sun Ra. Basically, they were Sun Ra with a sense of humor, and they were very witty and clever. If you listen to a lot of those Parliament records, the lyrics aren't. Yeah, there's some of them are stony, goofy, but you listen deep. There's a lot of socio-political commentary going on.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
A lot of environmental commentary going on.
Not only that, but One Nation Under a Groove obviously is a statement. So yeah, and so Funkadelic is just so much better in Parliament. I mean,
they're different.
Yeah, they're different, but that was George Clinton's more serious, I guess, quote unquote, more serious side. I mean, all of it was influenced by angel dust. Let's face it. Angel dust, acid, cocaine, whatever you want to say.
Pot.
Yeah, lots and lots and lots of that kind of stuff. Lots of party drugs. But Funkadelic was sort of more of his kind of soul and his like really thrilling stuff, whereas like Mothership Connection was almost like a high concept joke, but solidly musically with the funk. And again, it's credible and it can be fun. I just think it's just corny as hell, and it can't hold a candle to Funkadelic. So
I think it's right up there with some of the best fun. The only Funkadelic albums I would put ahead of ahead of Mothership Connection would probably be Maggot Brain, obviously, because that's one of the greatest albums ever made. But that would probably be it. I mean, honestly, because I love Funkadelic. I'm a huge Funkadelic fan as well.
Free Your Mind and Your Ass Will Follow.
That's really good too. That's a great album. Yeah.
That's a fun ass record. But yeah, and like 24-year-old me really liked Mothership Connection. 46-year-old me is like, oh my goodness, that shit is corny. So
No, it's not as corny as Earth, Wind, and Fire. They were just bland and blasé.
no, they wrote much better.
Parliament were funkier. They had better musicianship. Well, not better, but they had more interesting musicianship.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that. Maurice White could write himself a really, really great song.
More inventive and original was George Clinton and P-Funk.
I get. Yeah, George Clinton's pretty singular, but so is Maurice White. And so, I'll give it up for Earth, Wind, and Fire. Parliament. Okay, yeah, definitely influential as hell. Fun band, but I just the shtick is just it just rubs me the wrong way these days. Yeah. Be that as it may. So now we segue from the Brothers from Another Planet to
White Brother from Another Planet
to Ziggy in Berlin.
Yeah, basically David Bowie's Low in 1977. Now here's my thing. No, I do not agree with Shitfork that Low is the greatest album of the 70s. Fleetwood Mac, Rumors, Hello, Sex Pistols, Nevermind the Bollocks, Television, Marquee Moon. No. And guess what? It's not even David Bowie's number one best album. But you know what? Low is a foundational, one of the most pivotal, foundational, and influential pieces in David Bowie's catalog. It is a supremely important record. It really did, along with other artists and bands that I'll mention later, kind of set the stage for the sound that would take over in the first half of the 1980s, along with Kraftwerk. And I would argue Gary Newman and the group he was with before. The name forgets me now, but they kind of invented the 80s in the late 1970s, and Low is one of those albums. So
the first half of it anyway.
Well, no, I love the second half. It's beautiful, beautiful, meditative, ambient stuff. Better than some of Brian Eno's own ambient stuff, even, I think. Even though Eno worked on it. But Bowie in interviews has gone on to insist that people have always suspected, did Eno write those songs in the second half? And Bowie goes, no, motherfucker. No. He didn't say motherfucker, but he said, no, those are my chord progressions. Those are my basic elements of music. Eno just fleshed it out with the bells and whistles, but it's beautiful. Yeah. I mean, the second half of Low is beautiful. It's lyrical. It's really lyrical and really, it entails it conveys a depth and a warmth, actually, that the first half of the album, as amazing as it is, didn't really have that warmth, intentionally so. I think Bowie crafted the right record this way. The first half is going to be the icy, weirdo, fractured stuff. The second half is where the breath comes in. And speaking in that context, I think Low works amazingly well and has aged very well too.
He should have kept holding his breath. Honestly. Yeah, look, up with Carlos Alomar, down with Brian Eno. That's my attitude with Low, always has been. The first half of Low is incredible. It's a bunch of half-song jams. Yeah. Sound and Vision, and some of the other stuff on that first half is just extraordinary in terms
even
of
the instrumentals. Breaking Glass is great. Always Crashing in the Same Car.
Oh yeah, Always Crashing in the Same Car is fantastic. Here's my thing with Low, and for what it's worth. Since we're always apt to bring you a little bit of trivia in these things, that Pitchfork list of the best album of the 70s, number 5, Blood on the Tracks. Number 4, There's a Riot Going On by Sly and the Family Stone.
Overrated.
3, Marquee Moon by Television. 2, London Calling.
By the Clash,
And then David Bowie's Low. I would profess to say that Low is the worst of those 5 albums. And it's not even his best Berlin record. That's Lodger.
I agree with you. Lodger's my personal favorite, but Lodger's very different. Lodger is basically what Bowie was doing is taking the art, the ambient electronica and the art rock of Low and Heroes, and just twisting and turning it into this weird art pop. Lodger exists in its own among that Berlin trilogy. Lodger kind of exists in its own sphere.
It does. It kind of twists into this really kind of original thing, which coincidentally, pretty much informs Fear of Music by the Talking Heads. Yeah, I think Eno and Bowie came up with Bowie and Eno came up with this formula on that just kind of carried over to Burn and Fear of Music. Just one last thing. I wanted to quote from Stephen Thomas Erlewine, otherwise known as the one guy who writes for allmusic.com, who can actually write worth the shit, is the one that wrote the entry, that number one of the 70s entry for Pitchfork. And he says, Low is an album about rebirth, which is why it still possesses the power to startle. And in my regard, I would say, sure, it startles, as in, what is this shit? At least in the second half. Warsaw, I like. But here is the greatest diss that I can give it. Philip Glass, sometime in the 90s, arranged and conducted a symphonic version of Low. And the second half is much better as done by Philip Glass as it was done by Bowie and Eno.
And Glass probably fucked up the first half.
No, actually he didn't. Actually, his take on sound and vision is really good too. When Philip Glass is improving your shit, there's something wrong.
Yeah, I'm not a Philip Glass fan, so it's hard for me to come back to that.
So we move on from one icon that I have a hard time understanding some of his reverence for some of his albums to another one that I have a hard time understanding, Elvis Costello. So tell us about this year's model.
This year's model is my number 4 album that I love that you, Chris, don't love. It's Elvis Costello's This Year's Model. Now, here's my thing on Costello. I understand why a lot of people don't like Costello, particularly his later stuff, and particularly after from the early 80s onward, because I'll admit it's really patchy at best. I do like King of America a lot. I like Blood and Chocolate, but after that is just there's not such thing as a single great Elvis Costello record. It's just a bunch of Elvis Costello albums with 2 or 3 good songs in there, but his great period was that period from 1977 to 1981. And I count 81 because I really like Trust. I love that album.
I do too.
That's the album he did. Some of the members of Squeeze worked with him on that record. But anyway, we're going with This Year's Model, which is the album that is universally accepted as Costello's greatest work, period. It's the album for people who don't like Elvis Costello. And the reason why, it's his best produced album. It's got the sharpest production. The drums sound like drums. The guitars sound like guitars. The keyboards aren't overwhelming everything like they would in later Elvis Costello records. His lyrics are angry. They're sharp. They're vivid. They're a little too anti-woman at parts, I'll admit. Robert Christgau has always said this about Costello. I just wish he liked women more.
That's one of my complaints about Costello too. Yeah,
I get that. But remember, he was wicked young when he did these records. He was early to mid 20s, so this is before he matured, right? But the lyrical talent was still there, and this album is basically a new wave tour de force. This is probably the debut album by the Cars, in my opinion, are the 2 pinnacle. Oh, never mind. And Blondie's Parallel Lines, for that matter, are like, the 3 pinnacle new wave pop records, all came out the same year. The production, the tight, sharp songwriting, and some of his best songs are on this album. The cynics would argue all his best songs are on the first 2 records, and you could have a point. I liked Armed Forces, the one that came after This Year's Model, but the production.
Get Happy is really good too.
Get Happy is really good too. But the production on those, the sound quality isn't as sharp as the sound quality on this year's model.
Yeah, I agree with that.
There's a propulsion to the arrangements. There's a propulsion to this and the crispness to the sound that Costello has never ever captured since this year's model. And I think he'd be the last one to admit it. But put him in a private room to a gun to his head, he'd be the first one to admit it, though. In that regard,
Yeah. So here's my take on this year's model. I hope he paid Steve Neve really strong royalties and hooked him up with millions of dollars for life. His keyboardist, he's the star of the record. The Attractions, wonderful band. The Thomas Brothers, the sound, the consistency of those arrangements, and like you said, the propulsion.
I'm not sure they were brothers though.
But the Thomases?
Yeah, I think they're the bass player and the drummer. Their last names are Thomas, but I'm not 100% sure they're brothers. We may have to do a curmudgeonly investigation there.
Yes. Okay. Maybe two guys named Thomas.
We'll do it live on air. Fuck it. Let's do it.
Yeah. Okay. So you do that while I'm bitching. So, okay. So the band is great and sounds great. Too bad they're stuck with a bunch of songs that mostly are insubstantial. Look.
Disagree. Some of his best songs.
Well, okay. 3 great songs. Radio, Pump It Up, and This Year's Girl. Great songs.
Chelsea is a great song.
Okay, Chelsea
is great.
Chelsea's an okay song.
Is great.
Chelsea's the only decent guitar lick on the entire record. Yeah, and that's the thing. So here's the thing. Costello clearly was influenced by reggae, 60s garage rock, and Motown. They're all clear influences. However, this album makes me want to listen to those influences more than this record. I just, this to me, the songs just, they veer between silly and trudging. And again, there is that fact that it might as well be the national anthem for incels, given some of the misogyny that's on there. So I just, to me, it's a really great sounding, dull ass record, with the exception of, like I said, I really think that other than the song that Nick Lowe wrote, What's So Funny About Peace, Love, and Understanding, Radio is probably his other great masterpiece song. And I love This Year's Girl. Other than that, meh.
The Beat is a great song. That's another great riff as well. I love the riff on The Beat. No Action is not really a riff song, but it's a great album opener.
I mean, the best riffs are the keyboard. Are the keyboard stuff.
No, I agree. I mean, well, Costello's not a riff guy; he's a songwriter. Chief and first and foremost. But no, I think the album is close to perfect as any new wave pop record can get. If you want to make the argument that Costello went downhill after this, I'll disagree, but I won't disagree too strongly because I do like Armed Forces. I like Get Happy, and I love Trust. Trust is really underrated. It's after Trust where, he kind of went down the rabbit hole of, I'm a sophisticated singer-songwriter while snorting lines of cocaine all the time.
Yeah, exactly. Blood Chocolate's a good record. Obviously, the best and most important thing he did after 1986 was produce a Paul McCartney record, the one with My Brave Face on it.
Which wasn't very good.
That song is great.
Yeah.
Elvis Costello produced that, but after that, and then the best thing he did after that was marry Diana Krall.
He also produced the Pogues, Rum, Sodomy, and the Lash.
Yeah, and then he did that awful record with the Roots.
That was terrible.
yeah, that was terrible. So anyway, like I said, Elvis Costello, I'm like, I don't quite get the reverence, other than the fact that he did have the Attractions, and for that one album, they were maybe one of the great backing bands in recorded rock history. I'll give it that. Wonderful sounding record, but boring.
Okay, we move on from one hook laden masterpiece to another that you're not crazy about. Number 5, Depeche Mode, Violator. Now, this is one of the landmark albums in electronic pop music. This did to Depeche Mode what the Joshua Tree did for U2, what Born in the USA did for Springsteen, what I guess Pearl Jam 10 did for Pearl Jam, whatever. Anyway, it's the album that really they were kind of bubbling underneath the mainstream anyway. This album made them one of the biggest bands in the world. But is it that good of a record? Fuck yeah, it is, man. Any album that has Personal Jesus and Enjoy the Silence, being one of the most beautiful love songs ever recorded in the history of the 20th century, really should deserve, and all the other great songs that are on this deserves its credit. I think Violator is a perfect record. I think it's bettered only by the album that followed, the 1993 Songs of Faith and Devotion, which is my personal favorite Depeche Mode album. But I think Violator deserves all the props that it gets. I think it's easily one of the best albums of all time, and it's a watershed in electronic music crossing over to the mainstream easily.
And I doesn't. This is another case of like kind of Neil Young's Harvest, where the hits make the record. Obviously, Personal Jesus, Enjoy the Silence, and my favorite of the songs, Policy of Truth, are all awesome. The rest of the album, they kind of evoke the minimalist electronica that they were going for as far back as 1984, Some Great Reward. The most annoying thing is the song Clean steals the bass line from Pink Floyd's Sheep, which is a little strange. But again, so, it's like the curse of the handsome guy, as I always say, that, that they propel and they get out there and get more revered than they obviously should. The singles, make the record here. The rest of it, again, is just all of this sort of more blatant Martin Gore, electronic, sort of more truer to their roots, but more boring, way more boring than their roots. So, the hits.
World in my eyes is a great pop song. Sweetest Perfection has this drive to it, this kind of haunting and suspenseful at the same time. Halo is really good. I like that song a lot. That's a great.
Halo is not bad, but
this album
like I
is
said,
littered with pop nuggets, brilliant songs. All of
them. But none of it has the drive. You said Propulsion. Those 3 singles, I mean, they blast out of the fucking stereo. I mean, they're just life to those records. Like when I hear those songs, I don't picture a band in a studio. Those songs just live on their own. The rest of it, I don't know. It just pales. It's chasing behind. So 3 great songs make for a classic. I never agreed with that.
Perfect I said only bettered by the one that followed. Perfect album. All right, from one perfect album to one that's almost perfect, and that's number 6, the American indie rock classic Pavement, Slanted and Enchanted. Okay, I'll admit I'm a diehard Pavement fan. This is not my favorite Pavement album. My favorite Pavement album is still Brighten the Corners from 1997. And I like Crooked Rain a lot. But this album is important because this is the album that ushered in the lo-fi indie rock movement of the 1990s. And for the most part, for the better than for the worse. Because, if you had, without this album, Sebadoh wouldn't have come as close to crossing over. You wouldn't, Guided by Voices wouldn't have gotten a record deal without, Pavement, breaking through with Slanted and Enchanted. And behind the cheap lo-fi production and behind all that, behind all the fuzz and the noise, there are some delectable, perfect, hooky pop songs. And they come one after another. Summer Babe, Trigger Cut, Conduit for Sale, Zurich is Stained, Loretta's Scars. Here's one of Stephen Malkmus's greatest ballads, Perfume V. It's just one great, brilliant freaking song after another. It's a testament how, like, you can have the shittiest, worst production you can imagine. And in Pavement's case, I think this was an aesthetic choice. I don't think they chose it to be this bad. I mean, they didn't have the money to make a great record, but if you listen to their EPs and singles before Slanted, they all had a similar sound. This was their aesthetic back then. And no matter how badly and cheaply produced a record is, if you have great top-notch songs, you have a great top-notch record. And I think this is a testament to that. It's what introduced the world to Malkmus and Pavement and the brilliance of his labyrinth lyrics. I mean, it's a classic. It's a worshipped classic for a reason. Slanted and Enchanted.
Yeah, I gotta admit, this is curmudgeonly research sometimes pays dividends.
Yeah.
And I don't have as much animus towards this record as I did a week ago. That said, the lo-fi-ness is what always annoyed me about it. I think that Malkmus's vocals, with the exception of Here, which is gorgeous, are too under the mix. I think that it's a little too sloppy and messy. Yes, some of the songs are there, but even Malkmus is still a work in progress. There are a couple of great melodies, Trigger Cut being one of them, but it was the beginning of a road that led to one of the best albums of the 90s, Bright in the Corners, 6 years later.
Yeah.
And so this is the start, but it's a start. And, look, I guess I get why Pavement is a thing. People our age, it kind of spoke to us, especially women. Malkmus was this oddly a sex symbol. But yeah, but there's, like I said, there's just a lot of near misses. Summer Babe, great riff, great vibe. Melody is not quite there. Conduit for Sale is a really fun, shticky song.
Yeah,
but
it's indie arena rock.
Yeah, basically, it's shticky as hell, and seeing it live is a kick. They clearly have fun with it. But again, they were undercooked at the time. The production gets in the way. There's a couple of songs where you actually strain to figure out what Malkmus is saying, which is not the case, because by the time they get even Crooked Rain, they hear this, that Malkmus's voice is the strongest feature of the Pavement songs, even more than the good music played bad, guitar, that kind of weird style that Malkmus and Spiral Stairs had. So I'm more admiring of this record. There are a few great songs on it, but just too undercooked. And I guess it started something, but there's still a lot of people like, the intelligentsia and the rock critics out there, when they do their best of lists, this is the one that always is out front. Bullshit. Bright in the Corners. I think one of the 5 best rock records of the 90s. This one, not so much.
Yeah, I mean, I think the undercookedness, as you call it, I think that's the point, though. That's part of the point of this record. They were going for that, They were going for that because it really is a backlash against a lot of the really heavily overproduced shit that was going on in the late 80s and the very, very early 90s. And this was Pavement's, big middle finger to that. I really do believe they intentionally went for this. They really wanted to do this kind of sound that really harkens back to one of Malkmus's heroes, Marky Smith and the Fall, and the late 70s. If you listen to a lot of the Fall, the early Fall stuff, sounds a lot like this. It has that kind of rough, underproduced style. And I think Malkmus wanted that, and he's never been afraid, never been ashamed of his love of Mark E. Smith. So I think this was like his way of emulating that. Like a lot of great rock art, tradition of rock and roll, you always start off emulating your heroes, right? So,
Yep.
and this is no exception to that.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. I think that's kind of the story of Pavement. They started off by emulating their heroes, and then by the end of their run, they became heroes.
Yeah.
And just they became actually truly singular.
Yeah.
So, but this is where it started, and I shrug my shoulders, and I've always been puzzled at and I understand that that's the defense that people make, and me, I've always called it good music played badly.
Yeah.
But here it's just done really badly, and too badly
Yeah.
for my liking. So,
all right. So from one singular artist to another, number 7 album that I love that Chris doesn't. Tori Amos, Little Earthquakes, from the same year that Pavement Slanted album came out, 1992. Now, here's my thing. I'm normally not a fan of the kind of music that Tori Amos does. This is not my shtick. I like a little more backbone in my music. But Tori Amos, the way I've always described, I mean, she's always been, when she first came out, she was described as kind of a Kate Bush wannabe. For me, she takes Kate Bush's stick and improves it in every way possible.
Well, that I'll agree. That I'll agree with.
Yeah, she's a better singer, better songwriter, way better musician, way more compelling music, and more interesting and more diverse. And she became more diverse as she went on. But it doesn't take away from what I think is the almost pop perfection of Little Earthquakes, which, I mean, in spite of everything that annoys me about this kind of, soft coffee shop pop, the songwriting is just, the compositions are exquisite. The singing is impeccable. The musicianship, of course, is great. Everyone knows Tori Amos can rip it on the piano. But it's just an amazing, I'm just a sucker for great pop songs. And there are some great freaking pop songs with really compelling and at times, sometimes a little disturbing lyrics. And that's one of the patented hallmarks of Tori Amos's career, is that she's like, well, when she was good, she's not so good anymore. Her recent music is terrible. But like in her hot streak in the 1990s, it was beautifully sung lyrics, but like with a very subtle, understated menace behind them. And she would explore that in later albums more explicitly. But you hear that the germination of that in this album. And in here, but it's still, it's the beauty that carries through. And there's just some beautiful songs that are really well produced, that have aged well, that have stood the test of time. And she's proven to be very influential with a lot of, contemporary female singer-songwriters who all cite Tori Amos, especially that 90s streak that she had as a prime influence. And she is that.
Oh yeah, she's definitely an influence, but here's the thing. She invented a genre. The hot chick writhing at a piano who wants to damage woman the shit out of you. It gets to be a little much. Silent All These Years and Crucify are
those are the big hits. Yeah.
Wonderful song. Again, can't fault the hits, but then from there it's just I suppose if I was a pure white woman of that sort of background, if she was kind of like, a doppelganger for me, and, I had friends that into high school that were, and they loved her, those women loved her. And so maybe I would be a little bit more connected, but, after a while, it's just like, ugh. And then I know you love the song Winter. I don't. It's the longest 6 minutes imaginable. Make it stop. Make it stop. And speaking of women that think they want to damage woman the shit out of you, we go to Arturo's 8th artist.
Yes, number 8, my final of my crazy 8. The Yeah Yeah Yeahs debut full-length album, Fever to Tell, from 2003. Now, the New York scene in the late 90s, early noughties was really, really fruitful. I mean, the Strokes were the band that really broke it open, but you had the Yeah Yeah Yeahs, TV on the radio, and in my opinion, the best out of them all, LCD Sound System.
By far, by
Yeah,
far.
but the Yeah Yeah Yeahs were good. They had a unique, of all the garage rock, that garage rock revival, they had a uniqueness to them. Yeah, it was one guitar, one drum kit, a la the White Stripes, just with a real super charismatic, crazy front woman, or not crazy in real life, but just crazy on stage at the time. But the Fever to Tell is a really, really strong. It's not their best album, but it's a great record, I think. It's they have unusual instrumentation, true, but they also have an unusual musical style. Karen O, obviously, she took her name from Wendy O, the punk rock icon from the late 70s, early 80s. But Karen O was more of like a New York art school, art damaged version of that you only get from upper middle class people in Manhattan.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. But she pulls it off. And I think she really did pull it off for a little while with Fever to Tell. Fever to Tell is a great record. You have Maps, which is the big hit single from this. Probably one of the best, New York art rock ballads ever. Date with the Night, great rock song. Tick, Black Tongue, Y Control, beautiful. One of the best non-sonic youth instances of getting noise and feedback and crafting it into a pop song. Y Control does that excellently. Great album, Fever to Tell. I still think their best album is their one from 2009, It's Blitz, which is where they incorporated a lot of like synthesizers and electronics, but their songwriting really got better. But you can hear it here, and you can hear it in its most raw form, and you can't beat raw rock and roll. And Fever to Tell is just really great, raw, art-damaged rock and roll done as well as it can get.
Now, Fever to Tell would be a great record if you removed Karen O from the equation.
Oh, geez.
Really, really love the guitar. It starts off strong, rich, great riff. Yeah. Lots of, like you said, Y Control, Maps. There's a lot of really strong guitar, and they're almost in the vein of that Stripes, Black Keys kind of, 2 or 3 piece kind of riff bang, but done a little bit more tastefully than those bands. Now, I mean, I hate to say it, but if you put like not Morrissey, but kind of like an emotive male singer, it would have worked better. Instead, you get a Screamy Mimi who was a phony baloney sex cat, wild child chick. Lots of folks have done this shit better. The big girl on the Cat O' Nine Tails from The Gossip, way better. Amy Taylor, who is the best example of this era and one of the best of all time at that role, I think already, from Amel and the Sniffers. But there's just something about it. She sings about her sexuality in a really grossly unsexy manner. I remember my old girlfriend when I was in Phoenix. We get halfway through the record, and Sheila had pretty good musical taste, but she said, "This is the dumbest shit I've ever heard." Was her comment. I kind of agreed with that. So, but here's the shocking thing, and here's the disappointing thing. She plays it straight on the song Modern Romance, which is beautiful and a really great song, and the best song on the record, in my opinion, even better than Maps, where she actually sings with real heart and without the gimmickry. So, look, back in the day, the most intriguing thing about her is that she could sing while she was chugging a beer. I can, that's what I'm saying. Karen O ruins what otherwise would have been a great record. That's my take.
On this episode, Chris and I squared off over albums we loved and the other didn't feel the same way about. However, for the next episode, Chris and I will be in alignment as we present and argue the cases for the 10 most definitively overrated albums of all time. Enough said. Email us at curmudgeonrock@gmail.com or hit us on Twitter at curmudgeonpod.
Okay, so now we go to the albums. 8, the crazy 8 albums that Chris loves and that I don't love. Now, looking through these lists, it's a wide range. Some of them I actually like, but don't like as much. Some of them I think are just okay, and some of them I think flat out suck. So we're going to go with the first one. And again, chronological order, and we're going to start in the Summer of Love, 1967.
Gotcha.
With the band Love.
Yes, and the fun part here is that as we go down the list, Arturo's level of hate will rise and rise and rise. So yes, we are starting with Love's Forever Changes, and hey, I love this record. So this is the LA take on the psychedelic Summer of Love in 1967. Brought to you by the brilliant, eccentric, and we come to find out later, schizophrenic mind of Arthur Lee. Arthur Lee was, he wasn't Hendrix. He was more of a sort of a gentle, folky, psychedelic, charismatic black guy doing white music. He was, like I said, there's a mysterious quality. What he did is he took the psychedelia of the era with some of, there were the themes of immortality and some snark and some political commentary and a lot of this fear of the nuclear end. But he puts a real poignancy into it. Even some of the love songs that go into it, surprising poignancy, and also a surprising musical variety. So you've got the most famous song on it. He actually co-wrote "Alone Again," which has this almost. You could, if they didn't invent it, it would be self-parody. Because with this it's kind of acoustic dramatic thing, and then they managed to get horns in there too, so it's almost kind of like this like restaurant phony Mexican pop, but they make it work. Again, that's one of the themes of this record, is that they do these sort of kind of LA schmaltzy styles done through a psychedelic looking glass, but it works because of Arthur Lee's talent and fantastic singer. And again, with a lot of range. So you've got songs like The Daily Planet, which somewhere on there, Neil Young, I believe, plays acoustic guitar on, which is more sort of a folk rock song. To me, one of the highlights of the record, and more again, really dark but beautiful ballad, Old Man, is a terrific little folk psychedelic ditty. And then a song that has no business working other than the fact that Arthur Lee was a musical genius. And again, the poignant arrangement. This is called The Red Telephone, which is the world is about to blow up in a nuclear holocaust. And it's almost got this drama going to it. And almost it borrows from the San Francisco garage psychedelia in its jangly keyboards, but it works. So that's the theme of it. Psychedelic slop, but beautiful, poignant, and Arthur Lee makes it work. Sadly, after this, he kind of deteriorated and really struggled for most of the rest of his life. So that's Love's Forever Changes.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I don't hate this record at all. In fact, I like the album. I think it's a really good, strong record. I wouldn't call it psychedelic at all. There's almost no psychedelia on this record. I wouldn't call it that. But I do think it's overrated for two reasons particular. Number one, for as good of a singer as Arthur Lee is, he's not a particularly great lyricist. I mean, live and let live. And the snot has caked against my
Your
pen.
pants. Yeah.
Yeah, come on, dude. When you open a song with that lyric, I mean, it may be something that you were inspired by when you woke up in the morning with a hangover, but it doesn't really translate well to a pop song, And he's got some other awkward vocal, not his voice particular, but vocal phrasings and some lyrical passages that he tries to pack way too many words in one line, and it doesn't work very well. And the lyrics themselves are kind of cheesy and kind of corny. Like he could have used a little more. Like his buddy was Jimi Hendrix. He was buddies with Hendrix, and they were like two Black American rockers in an overwhelmingly white rocker scene, and
Yes.
they took divergent paths. Arthur Lee could have used a little bit of Hendrix's celestial vision when it came to lyric writing. The other reason that I think this album is overrated is that I think the production works in some songs and doesn't work in others. I think Old Man is corny as shit. I think The Red Telephone is, you said it works. I don't think it works at all. But I do like Alone Again, or I do like A House Is Not a Motel.
That's a great song.
And More Again is actually quite a beautiful song. So there are some great stuff in here. But I think the lyrics, the shitty lyrics bogs it down. I think the production's a little too schmaltzy for my taste because I'm not a fan of that kind of LA production shit. It's just never been my thing. But it is a really good record. It is a really good record, but I think it's colossally overrated. It is not one of the 100 greatest albums of all time. If you want to call it maybe 300, okay, I'll go with you there. But even then, like even coming out of LA during this era, I think there are albums that are way better. I think the Byrds have at least 3 albums in their pocket from this era that are better than Forever Changes. I think the Doors had a couple that were better. But anyway, yeah, it's an album I like, but I don't love for the reasons that I gave. And now
Yes.
we'll give over to the album number 2, which I like significantly less. Chris,
Yes.
number 2.
And this album, the reverence really comes from 17-year-old me. And
Yeah.
for 17-year-olds, Pink Floyd's The Wall is like wonderful because it has grandeur, it has statements, it has lead guitar on Loan from God, all
It
of
has
those things.
it's stupid grandeur and stupid statements.
Okay. Says you. Now, this was the culmination of Roger Waters had this strand that went through all of his 70s work. Rockstar veers into madness that somehow veers into fascism. Okay, whatever. But it builds. I mean, the height of it is the album before this, Animals. I mean, that's the best of the records. But here on The Wall, it works wonderfully because you get the Roger Waters persona, which was becoming almost like this creepy speak-sing thing with David Gilmour's finest hour as a hooksmith and as a songwriter, and beautiful and just dynamic lead guitar playing through all of this.
Gilmour saves The Wall, in my opinion. He saves the album.
Yeah, well, to me, he drives The Wall, but the Roger Waters stuff is wonderful too. One of My Turns, and Mother, which is one of my favorite, if not my favorite Pink Floyd song, period, is got a real pathos to it, and there's a depth of feeling to that, and it's the best marriage of Waters' eccentricities and Gilmour's musical, pretty and hooky sensibilities. It really, really works. The one thing where it threatens to just completely fall apart is all the stuff about the worms and the trial, and like the last quarter of the record, it gets a little goofy. But ultimately, I love The Wall. It was one of my favorite albums. It was one of my favorite albums until about 2000. The first 20, 21 years of my life. I loved it in college. I don't listen to it quite as much now, but it's one of those records that deserves its place in the all-time rock pantheon, in my opinion.
All right. This album to me is hands down, maybe not definitely top 5 most overrated albums of all time for me. I find it borderline offensive. I mean, for these reasons, the germination of this album came about in a concert when Pink Floyd were touring for Animals, and they were playing a stadium in France, I think, or somewhere in Europe. And Pink Floyd were playing, and some fans in the audience, drunk and rowdy, having a good time, going, yeah, 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 doing all that shit. And apparently Waters, being the prima donna asshole that he always has been and continues to be, found offense with that. He thought it was wrong. So he spit into the crowd, hated it. And then when the band finished their set and he left off the stage and he was huffing and puffing and all pissy about it. And he decided to write a concept album about how fans worship rock stars like they were fascist dictators. And what I find offensive is that the concept of the album is about rock stardom going out of control and how fans, how they view rock stars. And then, let me backtrack. What it is on one part, it's that. The concept is that. It's him just whining and bitching about being famous, okay? Which is annoying enough as it is, okay? But he's whining and bitching about being famous and being a rock star. And then on the other hand, it's an album with a concept of him moaning and groaning over the loss of his father and having an overprotective mother. Now, I agree. I can kind of identify with that, of course. But he had the audacity to take that element, the child abandoned by the father and having a possessive mother, and then growing up to be a pompous rock star who desires attention and then dresses up like Adolf Hitler, as in the movie.
Yeah.
That's just fucking bad taste, offensive. And Roger Waters has always been in bad taste. And as far as some of his not all, but some of his political views, it's really distasteful. I think it's overwrought. The concept is overwrought, and it's overwrought because it falls apart 2/3 of the way through. The story just falls apart. There's really not much of a resolution. He's trying to combine the metaphysical with the physical and trying to blur the lines between them, and it just comes across as hokey. So the concept, I think, is offensive, and it's flimsy and it's weak. And number 2, musically, there aren't really enough real songs throughout the 2 discs. I think if you get you can really make an incredible conceptual 6 or 7 song EP out of the best stuff of the Wall, and not have all the concept, the concept pieces, the tracks that push the story along. These 1 to 2 minute snippets of spoken word stuff or soundscapes that are just like story pieces. And to me, it just detracts from the overall story which is not a shame, because there isn't much of a story. And and whatever's left of there is a story is pretty offensive and tough to swallow.
So anyway, we go from one form of drama caught on record to another.
Yes.
Peter Gabriel's So.
Yeah, this is the number 3 album on your Crazy 8 list.
Yes, from 1986, a wonderful record to me. It's got there's a hopefulness to it. There's a romance to it. There's just a lot of great. It's one of these albums where you're in the mid 80s and the synthesizers are all the rage, and the white boys are figuring out how to use the electronic drums to good effect. And Peter Gabriel does this marvelously with these wonderfully dramatic, hopeful, romantic, like I said, Red Rain, And In Your Eyes, obviously memorialized forevermore by Say Anything. I guess, some of the Don't Give Up, which is the only Kate Bush moment I can stand. And then even at the end, where you get some of the almost spoken word thing with Laurie Anderson, which I really think works. And so to me, it's a damn near perfect record. Sledgehammer is a little bit of a curveball compared to the rest of it, but it's still a kick-ass single, and one of the better radio-ready singles of that era. Peter Gabriel, very smart, incredibly talented, and this was his finest hour. This was another album that actually 14-year-old me obsessed over, but I recently revisited a couple of years ago, and it holds up. It aged well.
Yeah. To me, this album hasn't aged well, and the reason is it suffers from what I call 80s-itis. And that is this syndrome throughout the decade that in the music industry, where bands or artists would come out with albums of like 2 or 3 amazing songs, great singles, and the rest of the album is filler. And to me, this is a classic example of that. Another classic example is Dire Straits' "Brothers in Arms," but that's another commentary for another story. But here, like Sledgehammer, which is really, you're right, it's an outlier for the sound of this album. In Your Eyes, Big Time. Those are the 3 big singles. All 3 amazing songs, great singles. Some of the best songs Peter Gabriel, some of the best pop songs Peter Gabriel ever wrote. But the rest of the record, to me, is just new age wallpaper music. It's just continuously slow. It's incessantly somber. It's just plodding and meandering, and it doesn't have the tightness and like with You and Violator is with me and So. These 3 amazing songs that pop out of the speakers, and the rest of the record is just miasma. and then and it has Kate Bush on it, which makes it worse. So
if you folks haven't figured out that one of the goals of the Curmudgeon Rock Report is to shit on Kate Bush wherever and whenever possible.
Sorry, and her fans.
Sorry, Kate, but fuck you. So,
although I've heard she's a very nice, lovely person as a human being.
I'm sure.
She's a wonderful human being. A nice.
And maybe we can have her on as a guest. We can go point counterpoint, and she can charm the shit out of us. So come on, Kate.
As long as she'll talk about anything but her music, she's welcome on the show.
There you go.
All right. So what's next?
We go to the least Peter Gabriel thing imaginable.
Number 4.
Yes. We talk about Metallica's Black Album, self-titled record that has become known as the Black Album. I love this album. Is it Metallica's best record? No, but it was a statement. And this was Metallica deciding that, one, they were going to get a real producer that could capture the power and just the pure, what would you call it? Just the force of what they were doing as a speed metal act.
Yeah.
All those years that, through a series of mostly badly produced records that were mostly recorded in Denmark, that just didn't hit. But they made a commitment to building songs on one riff that really were, I guess, as pop songs. I guess this is pop Metallica, but it's tight Metallica. Now, before this, obviously, you think of the more Cliff Burton inspired symphonic touches. The Kirk Hammett, the long, beautiful solo on Master of Puppets, Orion. You would think of For Whom the Bell Tolls, where the riff is actually a bass riff. And, you think of some of those longer, more sort of athletic, really fast songs, Ride the Lightning, which is probably my favorite Metallica song in the catalog. But here you get Enter Sandman, which has one of the great riffs in the history of riffology. And just boom, 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 and just sounds wonderful. Great tone, and it just rides that same riff, and it does that over and over and over through the record, and just wonderful stuff. Holier Than Thou, Nothing Else Matters, which is a wonderful ballad. And you get some of for Wherever I May Roam. All of that stuff. It's just a really strong, focused, tight record that just has this boom and actual bass. Jason Newsted is a star of this record. And it's also, I think, they kind of allowed Kirk Hammett to actually jam for a change, as opposed to doing a million notes that you might as well be sitting and looking at a music chart. He actually jams here, and he's better for it. So love this album, and always been a big fan of it. I listen to it several times a year still, and I find new things to enjoy every time I listen to it.
Yeah, I'll refer to Kirk Hammett himself when talking about this album a few years ago in an issue of Mojo. He described it as the Black Master of Puppets, Ride the Lightning. Those are great albums. Black Album is an album that has some great songs. And that's exactly it. I think this album is basically suffers from 80s-itis, but in the early 90s. The singles from this album, the big five: Enter Sandman, Sad But True, Unforgiven, Wherever I May Roam. What's the other big one? Nothing Else Matters, like you mentioned. Those are five of the greatest songs in Metallica's entire discography. This would have been the greatest EP ever made, but they had to put great sounding, like you said, wonderful production, but great sounding turds like Of Wolf and Man and
I like that song.
Through the Never. Like,
and I actually like that song. The bridge on that song is awesome.
From after Nothing Else Matters, the album, songwriting wise, just falls apart. There's no interesting riffs. Hetfield's vocals are at their most exaggerated and Spinal Tap-ish. And it's just kind of like, lyrically, it's kind of cliche Metallica. My Friend of Misery. I mean, Jesus Christ,
Yeah.
haven't they done this shit already?
Yeah, the only two real misfires are Don't Tread on Me and My Friend of Misery. But those are forgivable sins because the rest of it is just so strong and so consistent. Now we go from probably maybe the biggest mongoloid on this record to
number 5, Moby.
Yeah, to the biggest wuss on this record, on this list. Moby, well, James Hetfield and Moby have one thing in common. They're both insufferable assholes. Yeah, and Moby is like this self-serious, East Village creature. But I never liked Moby. I thought Moby, okay, fine. Maybe he was a good DJ, and he was one of those EDM stars that EDM people liked, and I never liked EDM people. But Moby was also a very, very smart consumer of samples. And in the late 90s, he became familiar with the work of Alan Lomax, who is, one of the most important archivists, musical archivists in history, where he, in the early part of the 20th century, went around capturing, he did these vocal recordings of these black gospel and blues and early R&B singers, and had all this archive of these clips of these recordings. Moby took some of these and built songs around them, and it works amazingly well on the album Play. Arturo can tell you I played this album over and over and over and over and over again for a year. Moby plays a lot on this album. There's a pop sensibility to it. Even the ambient stuff works, and it's because he's got these really compelling vocal samples. Now, this is a theme. This kind of kicks off an era of vocal sampling being the backbone of electronic and hip hop songs. And it was just an unusual kind of record. Now, granted, Moby, because he was a fucking asshole and an egomaniac, decided on his next record he actually was going to be the star of the show and actually try to play all the instruments and write glam pop songs, and it failed miserably. But for a moment in time, he showed his true genius as a studio guy, as an EDM artist, and as a sampler by bringing Alan Lomax out of obscurity and into the mainstream. And more power to him for doing that. I love Play.
Yeah, I much prefer the Alan Lomax recordings on their own, without Moby putting his boring ass beats and stupid piano shit on it. I've never liked Moby's music. I like techno. I like 90s techno. Moby's my least favorite figure in 90s techno, and I think the shit he did with Plays is just, I find it very bland and kind of subdued. I think believe it or not, the original Lomax recordings actually have more energy and propulsion to them than what Moby added to it. Moby just made it into cocktail lounge music. It just East South Lower East Side Manhattan cocktail lounge music, and for like people of that era, and that's what it was. And I was living in New York when Moby's Play came out. Didn't like it then. Didn't like it. Don't like it now. Haven't liked it since. It's just like I said. It's hipster cocktail lounge music, exploiting real American roots music.
No, well, that's the thing. Of course, I would argue that the second Massive Attack record suffers from cocktail lounge.
Honestly, most Massive Attack music not named the Mezzanine album is like that.
yeah, pretty much. But Play, I mean, it's got more energy than that. And again, there's a lot of good musical ideas, and I think it inspired, like Porcelain is a great song. And something that I don't think anybody in the world thought Moby was even capable of at that point.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah. You said, to hell with Moby. Let's move on to the next one.
So
Number 6, another band I really fucking hate.
Yeah. We're descending into Arturo's truest ire as we go down this list, and let's get started with the Flaming Lips, the Soft Bulletin. I really think it's one of the best albums of the 90s. I think it belongs. There's a reasonable argument to say it belongs in the top 250 albums ever made. Incredible stuff. Once you realize what the concept is, which is Wayne Coyne singing about and writing about the death of his father, the slow death of his father from cancer. And so that gives weight to songs like A Spoonful Weighs a Ton and Feeling Yourself Disintegrate, which has one of the most beautiful guitar solos I've ever heard. And it's one of those albums, the older I get, the more poignant I think that album grows. I think it's as mature as the Flaming Lips get. Folks that listen to this podcast will know they're one of the goofiest groups in history, but that was mature, poignant, in some ways dark and oddly hopeful, alternatively hopeful and mournful Flaming Lips. Even a song like Bugs, which ostensibly is a throwaway, is a really great throwaway. Now, I know what Arturo is going to say, that the first time I heard it, I laughed because it does sound like soap opera music. So, the soap opera music, it just really, once you get past that and you realize that there's a purpose to the big drums and the string sounding synths, it really matches the mood. This is one of those albums where the music matches the mood masterfully. And so, really, I think a masterpiece, The Soft Bulletin from the Flaming Lips.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate Wayne Coyne's sentiment, regarding his father's death from cancer and him dealing with it. And yeah, I mean, it's a hard thing for people to deal with in life when you're losing loved ones. My wife's father has cancer now.
Sorry to hear.
Yeah, I think another friend of mine here in Korea has a relative dying of cancer. But man, why does it have to end up? Why does the expression of the grief have to end up being in the most unlistenably schmaltzy, corny ass, overly sentimental slop drop of shit that has ever come out? I mean, good God, does it have to be this freaking corny? Like I said, the soap opera music complaint that I have for track 1 on the Soft Bulletin still remains. I still can't listen to it without wanting to turn it off.
But it has an amazing lyric, and if you really listen to it and you get into the aesthetic of it, it's art.
I will admit, "Waiting for Superman" is a good song. I'll give you that. That may be the one shining pearl in the Flaming Lips' otherwise steaming pile of shit that they call a discography. Waiting for Superman's a great song, and Bugs is a nice little pop song. Probably should have been on the album. I know it was an outtake, but overall, I don't like the production. I'm not a fan of Dave Fridman's productions style at all, except for one instance, and that's in Slater Kinney's The Woods. But I don't like him as a producer. I've never liked the Flaming Lips music. I find them a bit phony, corny, overly sentimental, and trite. With very, very few songs serving as exceptions. So I'm not going to go too much into it. All I'm going to say is that time has not really been that kind to this record, considering how younger generation of rock music fans have kind of forgotten the Flaming Lips. It's only a certain generation of a certain era in that late 90s, early noughties that loved the Lips when they came out. But now, there's no list of any albums ever greatest albums ever has that album on it. But we'll move on to number 7, another classic New York moment. Because Chris, you and I were living in New York when Moby's Play came out, when the Soft Bulletin came out. Now we're going to have number 7, a true New York album.
Yeah, this is Jay-Z's The Blueprint, which we talked about at the beginning of this episode. This album, I think, is amazing. When it hit in 2001, for me, it was wonderful because I'm a huge fan and amateur historian of early hip hop, and the 4 elements, battle rap, the reliance on the samples, the braggadocio, and then kind of the fun cold rocket party, kind of block party, and kind of goofy, charming love song kind of vibe. This album did that as well as any New York record that had come out in at least a decade. You have to go back to the early, the Jungle Brothers Tribe Called Quest records, and maybe even as far back as KRS-One's Boogie Down Production stuff to find an album like this. So that was wonderful. The other thing that this album is known for is introducing the Kanye West style, and Just Blaze is part of this too. Kanye taking the samples of famous songs and distorting them and building the hooks around vocal samples, and Jay-Z riffing off those vocal samples. Now, Kanye would translate this into his own solo career and actually do it better than he does it here. Although Ain't No Love in the Heart of the City, which samples Bobby Blue Bland, and The Takeover, which is a sample of The Doors' 5 to 1, is just some extraordinary stuff. And again, as a battle rapper, Jay-Z was never better at this. It's one of the best battle rap albums I think ever made. Right up there with LL Cool J's Mama Said Knock You Out. I love it. It came out on September 11, 2001, and it was perfect because it was a celebration of everything that made New York hip hop so special. And so that's my take on this album, The Blueprint.
Yeah, my take on this is really more of a take on Jay-Z's career. If I had to create a Mount Rushmore of overrated hip hop artists, Jay-Z would be the first person I would put there. Him, actually, no, Puff Daddy would be the first person. Second would be Jay-Z. And maybe I might even put Kanye there, even though I have a love and hate relationship with Kanye.
50 Cent.
50 Cent. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, you're right about that. But anyway, let me get back to Jay-Z. Jay-Z, the reason I think he's ridiculously overrated is because he helped shepherd in hip hop's shitty phase. Like the shallow, vapid, money cash hose, booty shaking, nothing but, strip bar hip hop music. Jay-Z helped usher that in, him and Puff Daddy, the two of them together. But Jay-Z, I think, was a worse offender of it because he just became more popular. And I always found Jay-Z's brand of hip hop just unlistenable, insufferable, sometimes offensive, and just is just, he's kind of like the Gene Simmons of hip hop, in which he's just unabashedly capitalist. And it wouldn't surprise me if he were a Republican because of all this. And I that's why I've always disliked. I'm sure he's a nice person as a human being if you get to know him, but his music is shallow and vapid. What he represents in hip hop is all that's bad and shallow and vapid. People like him are the reason why Black Star emerged in '98. People like him is why you had the alternative hip hop movement of the early noughts.
Yeah.
People like Jurassic 5 and Aesop Rock and shit like that.
Common. Yeah.
And Common. I mean, those are the antidotes to Jay-Z. So when I say The Blueprint is overrated as hell, yeah, I do think it's overrated as hell because I don't think the beats are anywhere near as good as a lot of people think they are. I think it's I acknowledge he's a good rapper. He's got good flow. He's got good lyrics when he wants to be a good lyricist, but usually he's just, bragging about his diamonds and jewels and his money. Fuck him. Fuck that. And I don't like that. And I think this album is overrated. I don't like what Kanye did with this record. Kanye did much better work later on after this album. And even with Kanye, to me, Kanye is like hit and miss, but that's another discussion.
Yeah.
But Jay-Z to me is the epitome of everything that went wrong with hip hop. He marks the point where hip hop lost its soul, and it's had a hard time trying to get it back since. There have been some moments, but not many. And I blame Jay-Z and Puff Daddy for that.
I mean, look, normally I would agree with you, but there were 3 instances where Jay-Z kind of eschewed that. Reasonable Doubt, The Blueprint, and the Black Album. On those records, he plays it straight. There's very little of what you're talking about on The Blueprint, especially. That's more of a straightforward. There's some biographical stuff on that, and he's going after Nas. He's going after Mobb Deep. He's talking up New York. He's got the song "Girls, Girls, Girls," which is pretty much an homage. I mean, there's a reason that he's got Biz Markie and Q-Tip as 2 of the backup singers on that. And so, he's playing straight. Reasonable Doubt is one of the best records about the emotional baggage of being in the drug game. So he had, like I said, he shut that off for his best work, which he does here.
Yeah. His legacy for me is something, it's a damning legacy for someone who's a fan of hardcore hip hop, that's not hardcore, that's softcore.
Yeah.
And speaking of softcore,
yeah,
some softcore garage rock coming up, number 8.
Yes, as my old friend and current writer for Rolling Stone, Brian Hyatt, calls them, maybe the last band that'll ever be made up of 5 guys from Manhattan. as far as rock stars.
Could be very well true.
And we're talking about the Strokes. And those of us our age will remember 20 years ago, Strokes Mania was a thing. And then Williamsburg became a thing, for better or worse. But hey, at least we got the DFA and LCD sound system out of it. So that's a pretty good legacy to have. The Strokes, Is This It? Marvelous record. Yes, I know Arturo's going to say that it's influenced by Lou Reed and the Stooges. Of course, he'll say that it's worse than inspired by it. But I just think Julian Casablancas was a really fantastic songwriter and singer. Sort of really compelling, bratty lyrics about his romantic entanglements and his over partying and his flirtations with dangers, such as in Barely Legal or New York City Cops, which was actually cut from the American version of this record because of 9/11. The reason I like this record, though, and the reason I like the Strokes in general, would be Albert Hammond Jr. and Nick Valenti. The guitar interplay that these guys did was extraordinary. And then when you mix it with Casablanca's chops as a songwriter and a singer, there was a real allure and a surprising sexiness to them. Yeah, I mean, look, they admit that Last Night was a ripoff of American Girl.
Girl, yeah.
To the point where Petty actually liked the song and let him off the hook, which is kind of funny. But
he liked Danny California too. So he let the Chili Peppers off the hook.
Yeah, but he didn't let Sam Smith off the hook.
Because he thought Sam Smith sucked.
yeah, because Sam Smith stole "I Won't Back Down," so he did sue Sam Smith and get his royalties there. But look, the Strokes they wore their influences on their sleeves, but they really, at that point they really were, for a moment in time, the most exciting rock band to come along since the early 90s, because you went through that period where grunge died and boy band stuff came up, and so now you had this sort of revival of the sort of nitty gritty true rock as done by five rich pretty boy hot guys from from Manhattan who were all drunks and on drugs and all that, but whatever. But Is This It? I think deserves the hype. It certainly belongs on a list of one of the best debut records of all time, which, if you look in our catalog, it is one of our one and doners. But hey, I love it, and hey, Arturo, I guess that means that you don't.
Here's what I'm going to say. In January 2001, the Strokes released their first missile into the world. It was a 3-song EP called The Modern Age EP. And it contained 3 songs that would end up being re-recorded and re-released on their debut album, Is This It?, later in September of that year. But in January of 2001, I think it was Rough Trade Records, released this EP that had 3 songs: The Modern Age, Last Night, very different version from the version that became a hit, and Barely Legal.
Which was much different than the one on the record. Yeah.
Right. And that EP, that 3-song EP, is what started the hype, the big Strokes music critic, ass-kissing hype.
Yeah, and as it should have, because the version of Barely Legal on that thing is incredible.
Yeah, well, I'm going to get to that. I'm glad you mentioned that. The EP, the 3-song EP of the Modern Age EP, is really, really, really freaking good. It's really good. I understand why the hype was there. The version of The Modern Age is much better than the version on Is This It?
I agree.
It's much faster. It's harder. The version on Is This It? Is way too plodding and slow. I like the version of Last Night on the EP more than the version on the album.
I do too. Yeah.
The version on The Modern Age is more raw. It has more of a kick to it. And the intro doesn't last as long. Casablancas' vocals come way early, and not way early, but like just like a measure earlier and it makes all the difference. And he sings it with way more passion than on the version on
it's
Is
very
This It?
raw. You could tell it's a first take vocal.
Yeah. Barely Legal. I like you, Chris. I like the version on the EP, the Modern Age EP more. First of all, the guitar solo on the EP version of Barely Legal blows away the version on Is This It? That's just a monstrous, feral guitar solo by Albert Hammond that you have never heard him come close to that since. In no Strokes release since has he come as bombastic with his guitar solo as he is on Barely Legal on the Modern Age EP. So if you listen to the Modern Age EP, one of the greatest rock and roll EPs ever, I will give it that. Like, wow, this is a really great young band. Damn, yeah, okay. And then they re-recorded those songs and put in a whole bunch of others. And the reason why I don't like Is This It is three reasons. Number one, the versions on the Modern Age EP were done worse.
Yeah.
they made them worse on the actual studio album. I don't like which leads me to why I don't like them. I'm not a fan of the production on Is This It? I think it's way too muffled. It's way too subdued. It doesn't have that grab you by the balls, grab you by the throat intensity that the Modern Age EP had. And I think the overall songwriting on the on Is This It is lacking because the songs are very monotonous and very same sounding. They all kind of have that jing 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 jing. They all sound like Last Night in the Modern Age, and so the monotony and the same sounding and the weakness of the production is what leads me to say that Is This It is incredibly overrated. It falls way short of the expectations, in my opinion, brought up by the Modern Age EP. I actually think their second album, Room on Fire from 2003, is a much better record. It's a better production. Stylistically, it's more varied. You have elements of R&B and reggae and shades of funk.
Yeah.
on Room on Fire. And I think the guitar solos and the guitar riffs are better on Room on Fire. I remember I had this book by Lizzie Goodman. It's right behind me there. Meet Me in the Bathroom, Rebirth and Rock and Roll in New York City, 2001 to 2011. It's an oral history of the New York rock scene. And they talked to many members of the Strokes and other, New York music scene insiders, musicians, producers, blah, blah, blah. And almost to a man and woman, they all say Room on Fire is the better album. And the Modern Age EP is better. I don't know why Is This It gets all the acclaim. The first EP the Strokes came out with was better production, better intensity and energy on the recordings. And Room on Fire, which came 2 years later, is a better album. And they're all like they take 2 pages into this chapter going into like, why did this album get the big thing? It was really the next one that was better.
Yeah, well,
so that's where I stand on Is This It and why I think it's overrated.
Yeah, and look, I mean, I think it is a strong record. I actually think their best record is First Impressions of Earth.
Oh, that album sucks. That's a piece of crap.
Says you. That's a thrilling record because that's really Casablancas coming into his own and not being derivative. Really, again, great, like kind of almost wild guitar work out of those guys. But yeah, I mean, look, you're right. I mean, is this it? Compared to the Modern Age, yeah, it was a step down, but it's still a fantastic record. Hard to Explain is the best song on Is This It?
See, I think it's a good song. I wish it was produced better. I wish they get rid of the electronic click drum track and have a real drummer on there, and make it sound live in the room like the Modern Age EP.
Yeah,
Yeah.
So like I said, I mean, I get why people were disappointed on it. Like I said, Room on Fire with Reptilia, that's probably the best guitar work that they ever did on a song.
Yeah.
I'll give it that. But again, the whole idea is it's an album I love, and it was a genuinely exciting record for the time. But I can understand why some people out there, including you, would shit on it. So I love it. You don't. And there concludes our journey through vivid disagreements.
All right, welcome back. And now we're on our final segment. We are going to do our album recommendations from the vault. Older classic albums, or should be classic if they aren't, that we all should, and you all as listeners should be familiar with. And our choices for this week's Vault Classics could not be any more disparate.
Yeah, that is an understatement. Yep. We are going deep into the recesses of our vault, and we are going into some strange ass corners. And with
Exactly.
that, Arturo,
Yeah.
what are you serving up from your own personal lockbox?
Okay, what I'm serving up. All right, let's see. This is an album released in 1969 by a certain man named Skip Spence, who used to be the member, he was a member of the 60s San Francisco band Moby Grape, and an album that he released in 69 that has extreme cult love among music geeks and other musicians as well in today's age. So we'll talk a little bit about Skip Spence's Ore. Okay, now let's see. All right, Skip Spence was one of the three singing, songwriting guitarists in, like I said, the 1960s San Francisco band Moby Grape. His one album was, at the time, this album being Ore, it was the lowest selling album in the history of Columbia Records and was deleted from the company's catalog a year after its 1969 release. Now, that's the short of it. The long of it is one of the reasons why the Curmudgeon Rock Report exists, and this is it, is to shine a light on forgotten albums and artists. And this particular one is one of the most darkly beautiful, oddly hypnotic, deeply moving, forgotten albums of all time. Now, actually, calling it forgotten isn't accurate. Like I said, in the past 20 years, the album, or more, the album has enjoyed a healthy critical resuscitation and the admiration of some heavy-duty rock stars and figures. But we'll get to that later. Now, Moby Grape. Who the hell were Moby Grape? They were one of those bands that coulda, shoulda, woulda, but didn't. While the San Francisco bands of the time, like the Grateful Dead, Jefferson Airplane, blah, 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 they indulged in way out there acid rock. Moby Grape indulged in short, tight, concise pop rock songs with a sometimes really strong country rock bent, a little before even the Byrds treaded that territory. Personally, I've never been a big fan or never heard the greatness in the Grape's self-titled debut, even though it's consistently in critics' all-time best of lists. Although I suspect that will phase out as ensuing generations of music critics,
Yeah, it already has.
blind and deaf to anything that came out before 1990, start to become prominent.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, that really scares me. By the way, these Gen Zers that like look down their nose at anything that's 20 years old.
I know. Anyway, I prefer their second album from 1968, Wow, and the very strong Moby Grape 69. Those are much better records, I think. But anyway, nonetheless, I much prefer solo Skip Spence to anything Moby Grape ever did. And solo Skip is just one album, as it's the only album poor, mentally tortured Skip would ever do. Now, for the genesis of this record. For those of you who are as fascinated as I am by 1960s rock music and the counterculture, I highly recommend Joel Selvin's Summer of Love, which is a rich and exquisitely written history of the Bay Area music scene in the 1960s. For the record, Jerry Garcia and Stephen King, yes, horror writer Stephen King, praised the book as the definitive chronicle of that era. Anyway, In it, Selvin gives Moby Grape guitarist Jerry Miller's account of when the band was recording in New York in 1968 of what happened with Mr. Spence. Quote, Skippy changed radically when we were in New York. There were some people there that he met who were into harder drugs and a harder lifestyle and some very weird shit. And so he kind of flew off with those people. Skippy kind of disappeared for a little while. Next time we saw him, he had cut off his beard. He was wearing a black leather jacket with his chest hanging out with some chains and just sweating like a son of a bitch. I don't know what the hell he got a hold of, man, but it just whacked him. And the next thing I know, he took an axe to my door down in the Albert Hotel. They said at the reception area that this crazy guy had held an axe to the doorman's head. End quote. It turns out that Spence was on some really, really strong, bad acid. Or maybe he just wasn't the kind of person who should have been taking LSD in the first place. Regardless, he was committed to New York's Bellevue Hospital for 6 months under psychiatric care. It was while he was institutionalized that Spence wrote all the songs that would comprise Ore. Now, Moby Grape were on Columbia Records, so after Spence's release from the hospital, Columbia agreed to allow Spence to record a solo album in the label's recording studio in Nashville. A guy named David Robinson was supposed to produce the record, but instead persuaded Spence, or was persuaded by Spence, we're not really sure, to record all the instruments and produce the album himself, with only a recording engineer on hand. Spence said himself in later interviews that the Nashville sessions were only supposed to be demos. And when he gave the tapes to Robinson, it was with the intent to eventually add overdubs and a fuller production. Instead, Robinson, for reasons unknown, gave the recordings as they were to Columbia, and the label released it as a Skip Spence album in May 1969.
Yeah.
Needless to say, a demo-sounding album recorded on a 3-track recorder by a member of the least renowned and least popular band of the San Francisco scene did not sell well.
You don't say.
As mentioned earlier, it was the lowest selling album in Columbia Records history and was deleted from the catalog a year later. Now, that's a hell of a lot of backstory to the album. As for the album itself and its content, it deserved way, way more than being ignored and placed in the back burner of history.
Yeah, it really is kind of a beautiful, for a 3-track demo.
Yeah.
It's really beautiful and almost layered.
Yeah. This is clearly the work of a man who's either on the verge of or just came back from a mental collapse, and combined with the whole lot of guilt and regret over like a life seemingly thrown away, as several of the lyrics and the song allude to. Musically, it veers all over the place from like jaunty folk rock sing-along, like the first track, Little Hands, to these achingly sad songs of longing and release. My favorite song, Weighted Down, the prison song, to aching pleas for forgiveness and redemption, Broken Heart, and like these weird ass demented blues spirituals like Books of Moses, another one of my favorite songs on the album. The album ends bizarrely with a back-to-back stretch of like raunchy comedy folk, Lawrence of Euphoria.
Yeah.
And this, groovy, spacey, heavily rhythmic proto krautrock, Gray Afro. It is deep, but the cheap demo-ish sound quality of the album actually adds to the weirdo aura. In fact, it kind of enhances it to the point of like haunting resonance. Spence was clearly unsettled when he wrote these songs, and this is a very unsettling record. Yet it's unsettling in the odd way that it bears repeated listens. It makes you go, like, what the fuck did I just hear? And yeah. I have to hear that again to make sure that what I heard is what I heard. Yeah. The album does that to you. The album's reputation has skyrocketed to like super cult classic throughout the years.
Yeah.
Back in 2009, Beck, not Jeff Beck, Beck, did a cover of every song on the album and posted videos of him performing them on his website with assistance from Wilco on several of the songs.
Go
Believe it or
figure.
not. Yeah,
Yeah.
a
I,
decade.
I remember reading about that actually.
Yeah, yeah. A decade earlier, in 1999, an indie label called Birdman released a tribute album called Or, a tribute to the Skip Spence record, which included songs by renditions of the songs by Tom Waits, Robert Plant, Robin Hitchcock, Beck again, Greg Dooley from the Afghan Wigs, Mark Lanigan from Screaming Trees, and Mudhoney. Yes, Mudhoney.
That's a pretty wild list of talent. I can just imagine Mark Arm taking on Skip Spence.
Yeah. Anyway, very much a spiritual forefather, in my opinion, to Daniel Johnston. If Skip Spence is known for Eternity only for Or, I think that will be enough. This should be on any respectful and tasteful music critic's list of the 500 greatest albums of all time. It's definitely on mine.
Oh yeah, I mean, the guy was a mad genius. Emphasis on mad. Daniel Johnston, I think, did a lot of pretty stuff. I mean, I think he deserved his props. Coincidentally, I know we talk about Built to Spill all the time, but Built to Spill did a Daniel Johnston's cover record a couple years back that was absolutely fantastic.
I got to hear that. Yeah,
it was actually really, really great. Skip Spence, there was that long, illustrious late 60s to early 70s guys who recorded either right before the meltdown, during the meltdown, or decidedly after the meltdown. There's it's basically a subgenre if you think about it. And this is kind of the, like you said, the forgotten classic one. It's almost the asterisk as compared to like Syd Barrett and Peter Green and some of those other casualties. But here again, it's a beautifully weird, unsettling in a good way. Unsettling in the, like you said, did I just hear that? Oh yeah, I did. Oh, and that's fantastic. So it's one of the ultimate growers of that era. So good choice, dude. And so now we go not just like 180, maybe we go like 480 in the other direction. And so this album is not necessarily forgotten. There's a lot of people that revile the record. I am not one of them. And there is a what I like to call the gourmet metal set that reveres this record. There is the people that write for and read Kerrang. This is their jam. I'm talking about Slipknot's Iowa. Again, I tend to do the less forgotten records than Arturo does, but also albums that are underappreciated and deserve more discussion. So let's talk about Slipknot's Iowa. I want to slit your throat and fuck the wound. Want to push my face and feel the swoon. That is the most famous lyric from Slipknot's 2001 album, Iowa. Yikes. And yet the album is one of the best metal albums of the past 25 years. Yes, I'm serious. It's considered by the Kerrang magazine types that I just mentioned as a masterpiece. I don't necessarily think they're wrong. To me, it's an extraordinary listen and one that's a little bit more fun than it has a right to be. This is art metal coming to you from the dark, gothic, dingy streets of Des Moines, Iowa. Sort of. Yeah, these guys were all part of the druggy metal scene, which I guess, these guys were all, I mean, they wrote a lot of their early songs. The drummer, one of the best drummers of all time, Joey Jordison, I guess, worked at a gas station. And so the couple other founding members used to hang out with him in the gas station while they were writing songs at like 3:00 in the morning. So yeah, these guys were not like silver spooners by any mean. But this album, dark, brutal, unrelenting, negative, angry, but with a twisted sense of humor and just really just kind of viscerally just wounded type of record. They unfairly get lumped in with nu metal, and this is sort of lazy press stuff for you. They kind of hit at the same time that Limp Bizkit and Korn were hitting #1 on the charts. And, this nu metal thing, the Deftones being another example of this. They just happened to come out at the same time. And they also had a shtick that people saw as nu metal because they wore jumpsuits and they wore these homemade Halloween masks. Even Corey Taylor and Jordison admit that they stole a lot of their inspiration from Mike Patton and Mr. Bungle. This is not a surprise that they would wear these demented clown masks. They stole that from Mike Patton, but hey, Mike Patton loves them too, from what I've read. So the making of Iowa, they had moved to LA at this point. They had a successful debut record on Roadrunner. Because they were on Roadrunner, obviously Ross Robinson, who was the most famous of the nu metal producers, is working with them. They go in the studio to make this record. They're all fucked up on drugs. Everybody's expecting them to come up with something poppier and more mainstream and swing for the fences. Instead, they show how much they were influenced as much by Cannibal Corpse and Slayer as they were by their peers in that quote unquote nu metal scene. Now, when you listen to this record, if it sounds like it was made by guys who were living on the edge, it's because, well, they were. The opening track, it's about 58 seconds long. It's called 515, which is the area code of Des Moines. But it's basically, this band had 9 members, including a DJ, a sampler, 2 percussionists, in addition to the traditional guys. So their DJ, Sid Wilson, was going through lots of heavy shit at the time and had a legit meltdown in the studio of him screaming and freaking the fuck out. And so they begin this record with a remix where they chop that up, and it's basically Sid Wilson's legit meltdown starting this record. And that launches into the I think it's a classic. People Equal Shit is the name of the song. Yeah, it's a very blunt song. Amazing riff. They had a guitarist named Jim Root who was really, really good. And, just technically sound. Like I said, Joey Jordison was one of these guys who could do the speed metal drum bass thing, while double bass thing, while also keeping a funk beat. Lyric from People Equal Shit. Stop your bitching and fight your way through it. I'm not like you. I just fuck up. Come on, motherfucker. Everyone has to die. People equal shit. Blah, 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 blah. So really, really bleak. But there's a reason for this. Again, they were all fucked up and going through heavy shit like divorces and parents dying and drug and alcohol use. So I want to refer people. Revolver Magazine in 2018, they published a oral history of this album called Slipknot on Darkness, Anger, Addiction Behind Iowa. "Quote unquote, we almost all died." That is the headline, and I'm going to read a couple of excerpts. This is from Corey Taylor, the lead singer and lyricist for the band. I'll read this off. It's darkly funny. Some of it is dark, but it gets funny. So I'll read this whole thing. Quote, I didn't meet my dad until the tour cycle for, the 2004 album that they did after the Subliminal Verses. I didn't know his name or face. I had no idea that my mom had kept him out of my life for a very long time. When you grow up like that, you automatically assume there's something wrong with you. I thought my father didn't want to be there and didn't even contact me. It's got to be my fault. It was something that I struggled with and still do. It affects my confidence every day. I get by on bravado and talent half the time and a little luck, but at the time, man, there was no dealing with me. I was a fucking mess. I was drinking a lot. I was in a relationship that wasn't good for me, and I didn't want to realize it at the time. we went out to LA, and that's where I really started getting into booze and philandering. I was doing anything I could to feel good because everything else felt really bad. I was eating a lot, gaining weight. I wasn't feeling anything but misery, but I knew we had a responsibility, and that is why Iowa is so dark. I just remember a lot of darkness, a lot of anger. I was cutting myself recording songs in the studio. I was bleeding everywhere. I just wanted something. I didn't care what it was. I was rolling out pissed, and wasn't letting anything go. When I was doing this, the first album, self-titled album, I was letting so much go, and it felt good. Doing Iowa, I wasn't letting anything go. It was just rage for the sake of rage. It was just gnarly, and I was so fucking unhappy. Luckily, we got a dark, brutal, amazing album out of it. And then there's another excerpt from him. One night we were having patio furniture Olympics, throwing shit through the patio doors into the LA River. We threw chairs, all my dishes. We tried to get the bed over there at one point. It all culminated with a threesome in somebody's hotel room. I regret how it made my girl at the time feel.
Jeez.
So that's kind of the punchline. And so again, these guys, and there's more crazy shit like that. I definitely recommend singing that. But again, and so, there's a lot of down tuning, and like I said, Cannibal Corpse is a clear influence, a lot of growling, but then they hit you with actual singing on like Left Behind, which I think was nominated for a Grammy for Best Metal Song. They have a really funny, it rocks, but it's really funny, called the Heretic Anthem. And no joke, it's so dumb, it's funny, but the chorus is, if you're 555, then I'm 666. Yeah, I know it's fucking dumb, but it actually somewhat kind of works. So, like I said, despite the shtick, here's the thing: they actually were really good musicians. Like I said, Jim Root, awesome riff guy. Corey Taylor could sing his ass off. As him and Jim Root had a side band called Stone Sour, which had some minor hits there at that period. And then, like I said, they actually could do some pop songs. But the clear star of that band was Joey Jordison, who just passed away this past July after suffering from debilitating nerve disease plus alcoholism. Astonishingly great drummer. Like I said, he was just one of these guys that was octopus arms. Think about like Neil Peart, but even faster and even more sort of crazy. Just the double bass while maintaining a funk groove is a little, or I keep calling it double bass. The double kick drum. Pretty awesome. So these guys continue to be popular in spite of never-ending series of infights, lineup changes, and the deaths of their founding members. Their bassist Paul Gray died of a drug overdose in 2010. But these guys are still making a lot of money. They're still on tour. They're still viable, and they've built a cult. I mean, where there's all this speculation where they've had fun with the masks and all of that. So they're theatrical. And they're mostly reviled. They're mostly goofed on. They're mostly looked at as being kind of, tweaked out shit rock for tweaked out shitheads. But Iowa,
that's exactly how I would describe them.
but I think that's unfair. They're really talented, and that album is an absolute ode to nihilism and misery and really psychosis. And ain't no ballads on that record. Boom, 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 boom. Fuck, fuck, fuck. Shit, shit, shit. We want to kill ourselves and all that kind of psychosexual stuff. It's an amazing record.
Yeah, my response to Slipknot's Iowa will be very short and sweet. Slipknot sucks ass. I mean, seriously, this is the bottom of the barrel of shitty nu metal. Listen. Slipknot's aesthetic, their look, their theatricality, and their backstory are way more interesting than their music. And it's a testament to like how virtuoso musicians rarely make the best rock music. And Slipknot, while you can listen to them, you can tell these guys are really good musicians, man, is this shit unlistenable. Man, does this shit suck. It's just, to me, it's just the scraping bottom of the barrel of nu metal. And this came out in 2001, so this really was scraping the bottom of the barrel. And in several songs, like, Left Behind, which is the big hit single from this album, it's just unlistenable, atonal, like just noise. Unlike Lightning Bolt, their noise is actually musical. Slipknot, just atonal nu metal noise, but then with a really cheesy corporate rock radio chorus slapped onto it in the middle. Like, really, dude? It's like, come on.
I mean,
one
look,
unlistenable shit to another.
Now, honestly, I mean, Left Behind is the worst song on the record, and I think you're right. A&R was like, well, we got to put something on the radio because, again, I think there was this expectation that they were going to go in and take advantage of the fact that they became popular and were doing well, and that they were going to become this like huge commercial, kind of like Kiss type act that they could sell Corey Taylor's mask and make us $1 gazillion. And instead they went out, and I'll hand it to them, they kept their integrity. They made, again, it's a testament to the darkest of dark places becoming, again, I call it art metal. The 2004 record, not as good, still pretty strong. After that, then it becomes garbage. The Stone Sour stuff is actually much better than the subsequent Slipknot stuff, and that kind of sucks. So again,
so basically, this is their one shining moment for you.
well, they had two shining moments. The debut is actually really good too, but this album, it's just, again, it's they lived it and they got it on record, and just as they weren't nu metal, they were metal, and I'll rephrase that. They were metal. And they were just, for that time, they were extraordinary. So I will never completely, say what you want about it. Since then, they've kind of degenerated, like literally they've degenerated. But that was just a masterful accomplishment for them. So check them out.
I mean, maybe on YouTube. I know the whole album's on YouTube. Maybe if when my wife's not in the house, I'll I'll play it at full blast the way it should be heard.
And that's the thing. You'll catch on to moments where you're just like, you marvel at the sophistication of the riffs, and then you catch yourself sometimes going like, how the hell is Joey Jordison doing that? But it's also in the context of very good songs. I mean, there's only like 2 bad songs on a record. The rest of it is just, it's kick-ass. And with that, we leave the vault. That's way more Slipknot than most of you were probably expecting. Again, I love it. He doesn't. So at least we're consistent with the theme. And thereby we end
the 19th edition.
Yes, we're proud of it, which means we're going to hit 20. And for 20, it's kind of related but much more unified. It came out of the same creative brainstorming session.
Exactly. Brainstorm's a good word. It came out of the same brainstorming session. I put out a long list of albums that I like that you, Chris, didn't like, and Chris made his list of albums that he liked and I didn't like, and then we weaned it and we collated. Okay, these are the definitively the 8 albums that I love that he doesn't, and then conversely, the albums that Chris, you love that I didn't. The leftover are the ones that we agreed on, and this will be a very special 20th edition, the 20th episode. Next episode, the 10 most definitively overrated albums of all time. Period. No more needs to be said.
The Curmudgeon Rock Report will keep on rocking if you do. Catch us where you catch all the podcasts. Visit us on Twitter at CurmudgeonPod. Drop us a line at curmudgeonrock@gmail.com. Always check out our show notes at medium.com. Join us next time as rock nerds smack you with knowledge.
stay rude, stay crude, stay sophisticated. Thank you for listening.